July 2nd, 1808, Zaragoza, Spain. The outer walls of the ancient medieval fortress erupt in an explosion, followed quickly by the sounds of Imperial French troops storming through the breach, their bayonets and rifles at the ready. More cannon fire rings out from the high ground surrounding the city, as Napoleon's vaunted artillery gunners continue to rain howitzer and mortar fire down with ruthless efficiency. The frontline Spanish forces, many of them seeing combat for the first time, begin to break in the face of the invincible Grand Army. They have fought heroically in defense of their city, but now faced with overwhelming opposition, their resolve begins to waver. One Spanish cannon crew holds fast to their post, however, the four-man team laboring to reload another charge of grape shot down the barrel of their fearsome weapon. They clear the tube, ram a cartridge into the breech, prime it, and boom! A massive explosion and a crackle of gunfire hits the Spanish gun crew. For a moment, all is obscured in smoke. And then, as it begins to fade, the crew is down, dead or wounded. It's unclear. But for now, the gun and its charge of lethal anti-infantry grape shot lay abandoned, pointed at the enemy front lines with no one to operate it. But then, amid the desolation, amid the hopelessness, with the city's defenders falling back in increasing disarray, a figure appears. A woman, clad in a white dress, her long black hair flowing behind her. She's running through the rubble, the smoke, and the fire, running past fleeing soldiers, running towards the advancing armies of Napoleon, running for that cannon. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. It's a busy time of year, but I think I'm holding up. How are you, Ben?
Yes, this is that time of the year. We have all of the holidays. I have birthdays for most of my family. My brother, my son, and my wife all have birthdays within like 10 days of each other, which like bracket Thanksgiving on either side. So that's
it's
always
nonstop.
Yeah, it's nonstop, and we're heading back to Brazil in early December, so we're getting ready for that as well. It's just a lot happening right now.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to talk about the episode we're gonna do today. And speaking of a lot happening, we're gonna be talking about one of a lesser known hero or heroine of the Napoleonic Wars. And I'm realizing as we were doing our prep meeting for this that we haven't talked about Napoleon yet on the show. So we're going to have a little bit where we attempt to summarize Napoleonic history as a lead-in to our particular heroine.
Yeah, but it's fun looking at the lesser-known people.
Yeah, and that's always how I feel about it, right? Like, you know, when I say Napoleon, people generally have an idea of who that is, roughly what time period, what part of the world, and like even people who are not interested in history at all can picture him from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure or whatever. And so, you know, when you say Agustina of Aragón, that's a little bit
like, who?
Yeah, it's a little bit trickier, but that's the kind of stories that I like, the small scale heroes and heroines who kind of have this one moment of glory and capitalize on it. That's the kind of story we're going to talk about today. So we are going to talk about a woman who manned an artillery gun in defense of her hometown against the invading forces of Napoleon in 1808. So Agustina is a very interesting character, and her fame and her glory is not just from the one battle, but from everything that it represents in the future. So she's a really important character in Spanish history, especially during, you know, at this time period and beyond. And it's a story that doesn't get told that much in the United States. So I really like finding these kind of lesser known or unsung badasses to talk about. So stick with us. We are going to talk about one of the lesser known badasses of the Napoleonic era. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And like we said, the story of Agustina of Aragon, the heroine of the first siege of Zaragoza, the defense of the city against the French invasion, the invading armies of Emperor Napoleon. The story starts with the beginning of what is known as the Peninsular War. But as we mentioned in the show's open, we kind of need to summarize what that is and who this Napoleon guy is and what's going on in Europe in 1808.
Yeah, and specifically in Zaragoza in Spain. So Zaragoza is in the northeastern part of Spain, and Zaragoza has been in relative peace for about 4 centuries.
Which is impressive because Spain has not really been in peace for a lot of that time period. But
but this part of it has.
Yes.
And meanwhile, elsewhere in Europe, this guy named Napoleon Bonaparte has declared that, yes, we have a French empire in 1804. He's coronated as emperor or empereur on December 2nd of that year. And yeah, he's crowned with a replica of Charlemagne's crown. Come on. Can you make it more obvious, dude? You know?
Yes. And then there's the whole thing, one of the big scandals of Napoleon's coronation was that he brought the Pope there to coronate him, of course, because he's the new Holy Roman Emperor or whatever. But then, the Pope is holding this crown in this big, in I believe it's in Notre Dame. And then Napoleon's like, cool. And he takes the crown out of the Pope's hands and puts it on his own head. And this was too much for the royalty of Europe. You are not supposed to do that.
Yeah, you're supposed to at least pay lip service to, come on, guy.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes. So December 2nd of 1804, he's coronated Emperor Napoleon. This episode is going to be released on December 3rd. So that's the tie-in time-wise.
Yes. Yeah. And does he then just sit with his cool crown on his cool throne and just kind of hang out and eat bonbons? No. He goes on to take over Italy in 1805. He goes to war with Sweden, Russia, Austria, England, Naples, the Ottoman Empire. Always the Ottoman Empire.
Always the Ottoman Empire. It's like the Law and Order episode on an IMDb. Like whoever, if you're in Europe or for like this like span of X number of centuries and you list the number of countries you were at war with, the Ottoman Empire just kind of gets thrown in there as an automatic.
Yeah. Unless you are yourself literally the Ottoman Empire.
But in some cases, they fought themselves too.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Even Ataturk fought the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So Napoleon, he takes parts of Germany. He occupies Vienna. He wins Austerlitz. Now, this is the Battle of 3 Emperors. And
he defeats 3 emperors in battle at the same time.
Yeah. Battle of 3 Emperors. And this is on December 2nd, 1805. Hey, wait a minute. Yeah. He must like that date. Okay. He actually winds up forming alliances with the Turks, the Persians. He captures Bavaria. He made one of his brothers king of Naples. He made his other brother king of Holland. In 1806, he defeats the Prussians at Jena and Auerstadt. He takes out almost 1/3 of the Russian army at the Battle of Friedland. Sorry, if I sound like I'm rattling things off of a list, it's because I am. This is his LinkedIn profile.
Yes, destroyed 1/3 of the Russian army. Yeah, that's it. Like he takes over Europe. He decides he's going to be the Emperor of France. He puts together the Grand Army. He marches it all around Europe. All of Europe joins forces against him, and none of them can defeat him. He is this invincible general, and like I said, we'll do a whole episode on him at some point for sure. Although we will probably bring in people. We'll probably bring in people with bring in an expert to talk to us about that one.
That would be good. Yes. Yes.
So he takes over, and he kind of stomps all of Europe. Mm-hmm. And by 1808, he's kind of got everything from the Pyrenees out to like Poland, verging into modern day, like verging east of Poland. But he's got Spain and Portugal sitting there to his
west.
Next door.
Yeah.
Right next door. And he doesn't control them yet. They have their own king. He's a guy named King Carlos. that's happening for a while. But King Carlos, there's a little bit of unrest against King Carlos. And in March of 1808, King Carlos is deposed, unrelated to Napoleon, probably. But Carlos is deposed, he's overthrown, and a new king is declared, Fernando VII. He is declared the new king of Spain in March of 1808. So now we have King Fernando, sometimes you see it Ferdinand VII, and this is causing some unrest in Spain, and that's on the border with France. And the Emperor Napoleon, he very graciously says, why don't you guys come to France and we'll have a conference and we can talk through this and maybe we can find some kind of peaceful solution to the situation that's happening in Spain right now.
So he invites Carlos and Fernando for a little sit down.
Yeah, why don't you come here and check it? Come to France, I'll set up a neutral third-party location for you guys to hash out your problems, and maybe we can figure something out.
Yeah, and this could go in all different directions. He could work out some sort of brilliant treaty between them, some sort of power sharing. He could decide which of the two he likes better and supports them and kind of comes up with a nice little, golden parachute for the other.
He could do that. Although he kind of views himself as the successor to the Roman Empire.
Aha.
And what did the Roman Empire do when they called warring brothers together or rival kings together to dispute the problems? How would Nero have handled this situation?
Right, yes.
He says, I think I found a solution to your problem. I'm in charge now, and I'm going to put my brother on the throne. My brother Joseph, he was the king of Naples. He's going to be the king of Naples and Spain now. The two Spanish kings, they say, that doesn't really work for us. Napoleon throws them in prison. Okay. That's how you solve that problem when you are Napoleon.
Yes. Some other people might have solved it through poison, but he's going a slightly more humane route.
I suppose you could,
maybe.
This is one of the things about the study of history is that like imprisoning the rival kings and then occupying their country with 120,000 soldiers, that's a step in the more humane direction from what might have happened in the past.
Maybe.
He didn't cut their heads off.
Well, no, that's true. Yeah, it's maybe more humane for the kings themselves. On the other hand, now we've got 120,000 soldiers entering the Iberian Peninsula.
Yes. So he imprisons if you're a Spaniard, one of these two guys is probably the rightful king of Spain in your eyes, and now they're both in prison. So that's true. So yes. Both rightful kings of Spain are imprisoned. And French soldiers start moving into key locations in Spain. Now, an interesting thing happens around this time. The Spanish people, they don't want France to take over. And in May of 1808, there is a revolt in front of the royal palace in Madrid. Joseph Bonaparte is going to show up any moment now to take control. People of Spain don't like that. And on the 2nd of May, there is like a revolt against him by the people of Spain. The aristocracy is part of it. The non-aristocracy is part of it. This is like a popular uprising, not like super coordinated, not like a, no formal declaration of war by the, governing body, none of that. It's just angry people line up outside the palace to protest, and the French respond by opening fire on the crowd.
Ooh.
And the crowd responds by opening fire back because they're all armed also.
Oh, dear. Oops.
And now, now there's a gunfight in the streets of Madrid. They call it the Dos de Mayo revolts. But there's fighting in the street, and it leaves a lot of people dead. Like dozens of French and hundreds of Spanish are killed in the fighting. The French roll out cannons. They call in cavalry. And the cavalry they call in is, France at this point has been operating in North Africa. So they have Mamluk cavalry, so Egyptian cavalrymen, which is not Moorish, but it brings back a lot of thoughts of the Moorish occupation of the Iberian Peninsula, and it brings up a lot of bad memories for the people of Spain. And there's fighting, right? There's fighting in the streets, and a lot of people are dead. And the next day, on the 3rd of May, the French round up people who they suspect were involved with it, and they execute them by firing squad. Or they hang them, or they shoot them with cannons, and they do all kinds of terrible things, all kinds of reprisals to the Spanish people that are suspected of having had something to do with this, whether they were or not. They're not given a trial; they're just executed immediately. You see the pictures of Goya has done a lot of. He was there, and he does a lot of artwork about the horrors of war, and a lot of the artwork of it is about this sort of thing. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with now. Spain is apprised of the situation. This is what we're dealing with. We are dealing with an occupying army that has imprisoned our king and is going to deal with any discontent with violence. So what do? We have to resist, or we have to surrender. But there's a big resistance movement that begins happening in Spain at this time. And that's what brings us to Zaragoza. The revolt I just talked about was in May, but by June 1808, there's a woman living in Zaragoza. Her name is Agustina, and we believe that she was born in 1786, so she would be 22 years old around this time.
Yeah.
She's possibly married at this point, and she is seeing refugees beginning to come into the city. So the French are occupying Spain, and people are resisting, and they're being defeated, and refugees are coming in from all over the place to Zaragoza to try to find some sort of shelter there. Meanwhile, there's reports coming in of bad things happening throughout Spain for people who are resisting.
So she's kind of wondering, okay, us here in Zaragoza, they're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, maybe?
Yeah, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? Well, the guy in charge of Zaragoza, and remember, this is a popular uprising, but there isn't a very well-established aristocracy in Spain. And the guy in charge of Zaragoza is Jose de Palafox y Melci. I don't know how you would say the CI in Spanish, but
I think Palafox y Melci. Yeah, sounds
Melci. He is the Duke of Zaragoza, and he's aristocracy of Spain, but more than that, he is a friend of the imprisoned King Fernando. He had been a guardsman, a cavalryman in the military, and he was part of Fernando's personal bodyguard that rode to France to meet Napoleon.
Oh.
And when it became obvious that Fernando was going to be arrested, Palafox was tried to get him out of there, tried to escape capture and help him get away, but he didn't. It didn't work. He failed and had to return back to Spain, knowing that he had kind of let his king down. He goes back to Zaragoza, and there's these reports of various reports throughout Spain that maybe some people are starting to rise up against France, and Palafox is yes, we're doing that. Zaragoza is not we're staying loyal to our king, not to this Joseph Bonaparte guy. What are you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Napoleon sends troops to do something about it.
Yeah.
Napoleon, as we've seen, is not the kind of guy who's just going to be okay, cool. No, maybe we can work something out. Mm-hmm. So he sends one of his generals, Charles Lefebvre, and he arrives in June of 1808. Lefebvre arrives outside Zaragoza with somewhere around 10,000 French soldiers, most of whom are very well experienced, very well trained, and have been fighting at all of these battles that you listed, Pat, across Europe. They fought the Prussians, they fought the Russians, they fought the Austrians, the Bavarians, the Italians. They're combat experienced veterans and members of the toughest and best equipped army on the planet right now. And so Zaragoza, they're an old medieval fortress, though, Pat. You said they were untouched by warfare for 400 years, but it's not because Spain was peaceful for 400 years. It's because nobody wanted to attack Zaragoza in particular.
Yeah.
So they have they have old walls that were built during the days of El Cid. So they have these double medieval style walls that go around the whole city. And they're on the convergence of two rivers, one of them being the Ebro River, which is a very large river in one of the main rivers in Spain. So Palafox, he's got 7,500 guys. He's got less soldiers than the attacking army, which isn't always terrible if you have really good defenses, except that his guys are not combat experienced veterans. They are people who have never seen battle before.
Yeah, I think they're bodyguard type people, not...
Yeah, bodyguards and like militia, and maybe they have like a lot of medals. Like even the officer corps, maybe they have medals on their jackets, but they aren't from combat duty. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
Spain has, so they're in a little bit of trouble here. The French arrive and they surround the town. The Zaragoza is a big city, so they can't surround it entirely. So supplies keep being able to come in through the Ebro River, but they get mostly around it. They start setting up artillery, and they decide we outnumber them. Let's attack them before they can get their defenses up and running. So they surround the city in June. They launch an attack that has some success. The Polish cavalry, which is like kind of the best cavalry of Napoleon's army, they get into the city at one point, but they can't hold it, and they don't get reinforced, and they fall back. By the end of the month of June, like they show up in early June, by the end of June, the French have taken everything outside of the city walls, including like this big, the high ground outside of town at Monte Torero, where they set up siege guns and howitzers and mortars, and they just start bombing the city, right? Trying to bomb those medieval walls out of existence. And so that kind of continues for a while. They shell the city for several days. And then on July 2nd, they decide they think they've worn the defenses down enough. They've blown up the walls. They're going to attack the city.
Oh, no.
Okay. Yes. All right. So this is like the second major assault on Zaragoza. The first one had some success but was turned back. The second one comes on July 2nd of 1808. And Zaragoza at this point, right, they have all of these refugees that have been flooding in. They have the people from outside of the city walls who have been forced inside, right, as the French are taking the suburbs and the high ground and the convents and monasteries around the city. These people who are managed to escape, that come into the city. All these people are kind of condensed inside the city walls, which has then been bombarded for 4 days by heavy artillery day and night all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And beyond that, Zaragoza has been under siege for 60 days.
And they've been kind of getting supplies via the Ebro River, but surely not at the levels that they can sustain. Yeah.
Not to feed that type of population, right?
Yeah.
Like their food is getting low. The hygiene situation is bad, so people are starting to get sick. And they're running out of ammo. Yeah, it's bad news, right? And so the French say, this is our chance. They're going to attack. And they attack Zaragoza. So this is where Agustina kind of comes to the forefront of Spanish history. Agustina is 22. In most versions of this story, her husband is an artilleryman who works in the defense of the city. Whether he was an officer or whether he was conscripted in to help is unclear, but he is manning a cannon on the walls as the French are attacking. And there's a lot of French, and they're coming in, and they launch this large assault. They've broken through parts of the walls. The Spaniards have tried to repair it. It's not perfect yet. French troops, they start taking the outer walls. They start moving into the squares and towards the second set of walls. The cannons are firing, but the defenders are falling back, and the French are pushing into the city. And at one point, Agustina is there, and she is providing, kind of secondary help to this gun, right? Bringing water to the guys who are shooting the guns, that kind of thing, right? Maybe some like very light, like medical assistance, that kind of thing. But French counter battery fire hits the cannon that her husband is manning. And
oh no.
Yeah, and there's a huge explosion, and when the smoke begins to clear, most of the crew is dead or wounded. And now there is this cannon, which is a limited resource, right? There is a artillery piece that is sitting there pointing at the French, not firing. The Spanish defenders with their rifles, they're starting to waver and shake. These guys have never seen any kind of combat before. The French are marching in order, bayonets at the ready, rifles loaded, and it's becoming clear that this is a pivotal moment of the battle. So Agustina of Aragon, she, as the front lines of the Spanish forces are falling back, she runs past them to this gun. And, artillery pieces at this point, like if the French were able to take this gun, they could have literally just turned it around and shot it back at the Spanish, because that's all the artillery, that's how artillery pieces work, right? And so she runs out there, and she's, every time we see this depicted in any kind of media, she's there in like a white petticoat, right, with her, and she runs out there and she gets on this cannon, and it's been loaded with grape shot, which is basically like a lot of small iron pellets, like a 12 gauge shotgun, basically. And as the French are approaching, she lights the cannon, fires. There's this explosion. There's this big hail of grape shot, and it cuts down the attacking French. They start to falter. She begins to kind of reload the weapon by herself. And as they're seeing that, like, there's this big cheer from the Spaniards who are watching. And she starts to try to reload it herself. Her husband works the cannon. She knows how it works. She's seen it done before. She's putting the cannonball in. She's doing the ramrod. And people run up to start to try to help her, right? Civilians and some soldiers run up to help her man that cannon, because you can't. A cannon is at least a 3-person, 4 or 5-person operation. It's really hard to do it by yourself. People run up, they start helping her. The Spaniards are kind of looking at this like, I mean, you've seen the artwork from the French Revolution and the American Revolution, where, almost like especially the French Revolution, where like Lady Liberty is depicted as like a woman holding a sword or a flag or something running into battle. Like, I imagine, like, that's this time period, right? I imagine this kind of evoked images of that sort of thing for the people watching it.
Yeah.
And as everybody's watching, they're like, this is it. Like, she's fighting back. Like, what are we doing here? Running away. Like, the French line is faltering. This is a pivotal moment. This is our duty as Spaniards to defend Spain. This is our duty. This is our religious duty, because God has appointed our kings, the rulers of our country, and they've been imprisoned, and it's our duty to resist.
Even if we can't decide which king exactly, we know that it is appointed by God.
It's probably not Joseph Bonaparte.
Yeah, he was appointed by Napoleon.
Yes.
Okay, so they've got just their drive to defend themselves. They've got this religious drive, and then they've got this just amazing moment of morale where Agustina, did she intend this? Was it just a consequence? But she's up there, doing the cannon and appearing as a symbol,
Yeah, they kind of have that moment watching this, and they're like, we got to get out there and do something. Like, we got to go. And so they turn around, they stop kind of falling back. They push the attack, and they drive the French back, and it's a victory for Spain. The French suffer 400 or 500 casualties, killed and wounded in the assault, and it fails. It's driven back after it gets through some of the outer fortifications. So that's it. The Spaniards drive the French back. They're able to keep that supply area open on the Ebro. And this is a victory, right? The second assault of the French on this town failed, but the image of this kind of persisted, and the Spanish commander Palafox, he saw this. He was there when this action was happening. He claims that he saw her do this and was so inspired by it that, like, after the battle, he was telling the story of it that kind of was inspirational to the rest of the people of Zaragoza. He's telling them, like, oh, I saw in this battle this amazing woman. He commissions her as a sub-lieutenant, like a second lieutenant in the Spanish armed forces as an artilleryman, and she kind of becomes like the moment that we've been kind of describing is a thing that begins to appear in artwork and in newspapers and in letters and in, everything that says "Vive la Resistance" against France. I guess it would be the.
So she becomes a meme.
She becomes a meme. Yeah,
like a meme that's really motivating people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. The animated GIF of her firing the cannon.
Yeah.
with a giant, 24-point impact font, like, who says fall back or whatever.
Yeah.
And she becomes this, revolutionary icon to this degree that, that kind of, at the time that she has this battle, people aren't really sure what's going on with Spain. It's this kind of disorganized, intermittent resistance. But between her and Palafox, who does all kinds of heroic things, riding up and down the walls of Zaragoza, like commanding troops and organizing defenses and things, these two people are able to kind of present this, become these, like you said, memes, like this national propaganda movement of like, Spain is resisting. Are you with us or are you with the French? Who is your real king? And
be like Agustina.
Yeah, exactly. We can do it.
Yeah.
And so, and then that inspires what will become known as the Peninsular War, which is the big war for the control of Spain and Portugal that is going to be very critical in the downfall of Napoleon and the end of his empire. So that's Agustina. And, one of the other interesting things about her personally is that like her story doesn't just end with the Battle of Zaragoza. So
that would be enough in and of itself, but
right, exactly.
There's more?
But she's better. She's even better than some of I like her story so much because she keeps going after this.
Ooh.
So we are going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we're going to tell about what happened after the Battle of Zaragoza and the rest of her adventures fighting Napoleon across Spain, because she's going to fight him for another, 6 years before this is over.
So welcome back. We were talking about Agustina of Aragon, and her story is at least the basic memeified version of it, where a woman runs up in battle and starts taking over a cannon, is very similar to the story of the American figure Molly Pitcher from the American Revolution. This is something that has basis in historical fact, but Ben, as you and I've discussed, it's also a very arresting image, and it's the sort of image or story that it seems like people want to find in history.
I agree with that. There's one from the 14th century, I believe. They call her. It's in France. Her name was Jeanne Hachette. So they call her Jeanne Hachette, like Jean the Hatchet.
Yeah.
And there was a story where like some city in France was being besieged by Austrians, I think, and they're climbing the walls, and the French are falling back. And this 14-year-old girl gets up there with a hatchet and kills their flag bearer and throws his flag down. And there's like a statue of her on that wall, like to this day.
Yeah, Jean the Hatchet.
Jean the Hatchet. Yeah, that's it. One moment in history, but that is like you said, an arresting image that inspires heroism or resistance or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've got Jean the Hatchet, and in America during the Revolutionary War, you've got Molly Pitcher, and Pitcher is maybe not as Pitcher is a lot more domestic sounding than Hatchet. This is Pitcher, not like a pitcher in a baseball game, but Pitcher like, a jug that carries water. And
it's like not quite as aggressive as Jean the Hatchet.
No, but according to this story, the woman, or maybe women, who inspired the story of Molly Pitcher actually had jobs and actually were enrolled in the army as helpers. So you had women who would bring medical help, who would bring water because you needed to stay hydrated. And that in and of itself is pretty badass, because you're bringing water out to the troops while they're under fire and, taking care of them.
And that's the picture thing too. And that's what Agustina was doing for the troops in Zaragoza. And, you have to, obviously, like, it's the cannon, working cannon is exhausting, right? So you have to hydrate those soldiers or they will pass out of heat exhaustion or being tired. But you also use the water from those pitchers to cool the gun, because the gun gets really hot. And if a gun gets too hot, you can't touch it. You really can't load it. It runs the risk of igniting the powder. You put that powder charge down the tube, and if the gun is too hot, it will explode immediately because it's too hot. It sets the gunpowder off. So you pour cool water on the gun to cool it off so it doesn't blow up the powder too early.
Yeah. The name Molly Pitcher is obviously a nickname. And scholars don't completely agree as to who exactly is the, quote, original Molly Pitcher. And it's actually kind of cool to think that there might be more than one Molly Pitcher out there, because it means that we had actually maybe several badass women.
Yeah. There are a couple different stories of this. And like they're saying that, I've heard before that Molly Pitcher was just the name that you gave, that was the name for those women who had this job to, like, they don't fire the gun, but they run up and they help with carrying ammunition and cooling the gun off and all of this other stuff, right? And so that there was a thought that maybe that job was called the Molly Pitcher job, right?
Yeah. Like, hey, what did you do during the Revolutionary War? Oh, I was a Molly Pitcher, that
right,
sort of
exactly.
Thing. Yeah. So one candidate for why Molly Pitcher became a legend as opposed to just like a job description, possibly in the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey, 1778, the soldiers of the Continental Army are holding up as best they can, but the redcoats are pummeling them, and some of them are about to fall over from exhaustion. And a woman named Mary Ludwig Hayes is she's on water duty. She's one of these Molly's Pitcher. And bullets are whizzing around, and she's braving the gunfire and the heat and everything to bring water to the wounded men and to bring water to take care of the guns, as you said, Ben. She's doing her part, both for hydration and morale. Through the smoke, she sees her husband. He's doing his part too. He's manning the cannon. And suddenly, he slumps over. So Mary runs over. Yeah. And, she pauses quickly to give him some water. But then she grabs the ramrod out of his hands and starts tamping down the powder. She lights the match, covers her ears, I hope. And then boom. So Mary Ludwig Hayes may be the historical figure or a historical figure behind the Molly Pitcher who you hear stories about. And we actually have an account of her. Daughter of German immigrants. She joined the army 2 years after her husband did. And she joined in one of those, one of those roles that was okay for women to do openly, cooking, sewing, running water. At the age of 22, she was described by some of her fellow soldiers as courageous, hardworking, and really good at swearing. She was supposed to be really good at holding it together under fire. I suspect the swearing helped. And obviously she was observant, because when she saw what her husband was doing, she just tapped in without missing a beat. Now, Mary Ludwig Hayes is obviously one candidate for the who inspired the Molly Pitcher legend.
And before we leave Mary Ludwig Hayes, I have a great story. I have a great account of her as well from that battle, right? Because it's a very similar story. The Americans were trying to attack at this battle. They were stopped, and then they were driven back. And the British had the Continental Army on the run, and she was part of the holding action to, the battle ends up being a draw, but it could have been like a humongous disaster for the Continental Army. They're on the run, and she's manning this cannon. The cannon crew's dead. She takes over. She starts manning the gun. And as part of that, there's a counterattack by Mad Anthony Wayne, and they hold the line, and both sides kind of withdraw, and it becomes a draw rather than a crippling defeat for the Revolution. But there is a description of Mary Ludwig Hayes during the during the battle by a Continental soldier named Private Joseph Plum Martin. And he said, he says, quote, "A woman whose husband belonged to the artillery and who was then attached to a piece in the engagement attended with her husband at the artillery piece the whole time. While in the act of reaching a cartridge and having one of her feet as far before the other as she could step, a cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs without doing any damage to anything other than carrying away the lower part of her petticoat. She looked at it with apparent unconcern, observed that it was lucky it did not pass a little higher, for in that case it might have carried away something else, and continued her occupation." And so I feel like that's a good indication of who this person was, where she was just like manning the gun, and then like this cannonball comes and blows away. Like, she's wearing the big long dress still, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of blows away part of that, and she's like, "Well, glad it wasn't a little higher," and then just goes right back to what she was doing. Right? Calm under pressure, like you just said, Mary Ludwig Hayes.
Yeah, keep going, Mary. Yeah, keep going, Mary Ludwig Hayes. Yeah.
Yes. Actually made my job a little easier. Now that I don't have to, most of this dress is gone.
She wasn't the only badass woman. We also have records of a woman named Margaret Corbin, who was sometimes called Captain Molly. And she actually wore a uniform and was treated to a certain extent as a regular soldier and staffed a cannon. And that was maybe actually her duty as opposed to just something she picked up in an emergency, as in the case of Mary Ludwig Hayes. And she was operating a cannon at the Battle of Fort Washington and actually lost her left arm in that battle. She was captured by the British, later released. She's apparently the only Revolutionary War soldier buried at West Point.
Oh.
And she was the first woman pensioned by the Continental Congress, which is a fun fact.
Yeah, both these women, both Mary Ludwig Hayes and Margaret Corbin, they, and Agustina of Aragon, what we're going to see in a minute, both of them, or all three of them, had this moment of heroism that was then followed by a commanding officer being like, "Hey, good job on that cannon. That's your job now. So now you're a cannon person. Now you're artillery crew for the rest of the war." And so for all three of them, they were issued uniforms, and they finished the war out with their units. And after the war, they were treated as though they were as soldiers in the army. Margaret Corbin, they said she would always wear her jacket around. She could always see her walking around her hometown wearing a Continental Army jacket with a bunch of medals coming off it.
Because why not?
That's why everybody called her, Captain Molly, or Captain Molly. Yeah,
so the name Molly Pitcher is kind of standing for lots of women. And Mary Ludwig Hayes and Margaret Corbin, their stories actually make it into the canon. Yuck, yuck.
Oh my gosh.
But there, some historians estimate that there may have been hundreds or maybe even thousands of women who served one way or another. And And
that we know, because we don't know about a lot of them. There were women that served in Napoleon's army. Actually, there was a woman named Angelique Rouen who was a sword fighter, a swordsman, like a cavalry woman. The Russians had a woman named Nadesia. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I don't know what it was, but there was a Russian woman who was in the cavalry that fought Napoleon. Interesting, right? And in some cases, a lot of women disguised themselves as men so they could fight. And then, maybe they never got discovered.
In the Revolutionary War, you may have heard of Deborah Sampson, who actually enlisted as a soldier. She disguised herself as a man. She's maybe the most famous of them. And I just wanted to give her some recognition, but her story deserves its own.
We got to do our own thing on her. Yeah. She got shot in the thigh at one point while she was in the military. She was fighting for Massachusetts militia, I think. And
the fourth.
She got shot in the thigh, and she dug the bullet out on her own. No anesthesia. She just got a pocket knife and dug the bullet out because she was worried if she went to a doctor to dig it out, they'd find out she wasn't a man. She was going by. She went by a man's name for the entire war. Put her hair up or cut her hair and dressed as a man, and that was it. She didn't want her secret known, so she had to dig a bullet out with a pocket knife on the battlefield. It's hardcore.
Yeah.
Okay.
So back to Agustina, who doesn't seem to be disguising the fact that she's a woman. She's just out there doing her thing.
That's one of the things that's kind of interesting about her. It's kind of an Anne Bonny situation, right? Molly, the Molly pictures you'd mentioned were like that as well. Mary Ludwig Hayes and Margaret Corbin. Augustina, the fact that she's a woman, it almost helps her, right? Like it almost works in her favor for propaganda purposes of, when we see, I mentioned Goya earlier, he has all of these very powerful art pieces about the horrors of the Peninsular War and the Spanish, suffering at the hands of the French occupation. The only distinguishable individual person in his series of art about this is Augustina. And it is kind of she's kind of silhouetted. You can't see her face, but you see the white dress and the black cannon. And she's standing amidst this pile of rubble and this pile of dead soldiers firing this gun all by herself. And that is a powerful image, and that will motivate people to fight. And that is what Augustina does. The Siege of Zaragoza doesn't end with her, though, right? Word of her story gets out, and of her and Palafox and all of the defenders of Zaragoza, like that story gets out. That's like, hey, look, there is, it had been this kind of disorganized revolution, but now it is becoming more organized. This Duke has organized troops, and like they're fighting, and everybody in the town is fighting, including Augustina. And the siege continues, and the French are surrounding it. And now for them, it's propaganda also. We can't allow this we have to show what happens when you stand up against France. We have to take this city because this is making us look bad. They lay siege to it for all of July, then into August. And, in August, they send a letter to Palafox. It's like, look, we're starving you out. We're bombarding you from the towers, or from the high ground here. What are you going to do? And Palafox responds, it's war to the knife, which is pretty self-descriptive, I think.
Yes. He's not giving up.
Yes. They interview Augustina around this time about how she feels. And she's meeting with some high-level people from out of town. And she says, quote, "Oh, those base invaders of my country, those oppressors of the best of its patriots, should the fate of war place any of them within my power, I will instantly deliver up their throats with my knife." And that's how she feels about the French, and that is how the defenders of Zaragoza feel, and that is how Spain is beginning to take notice of and beginning to agree. August is going on, and then word starts to come in August that it's not just Zaragoza. Word comes to Zaragoza of this battle at this place called Ballien, which is an open field battle that the Spanish have organized troops, and the aristocracy is helping, right? The generals are helping. They've organized an army, and they fight Napoleon's army in the field, and they win. And that hasn't happened very often.
Yeah. So that's going to be good for morale.
You'll see it listed sometimes as like the first open field defeat of the French army under Napoleon. Napoleon's not there. He's not commanding the French army at this battle. But this is a big turning point in Spain. This is, Viva la Revolucion.
Yeah,
and you've got this big battle at Ballien. You've got the defense of Zaragoza. The French withdraw. They can't. They've got 120,000 guys in the country, which was enough to pacify them when all of Spain was not actively fighting back, but now they are. They don't want French here, and they're fighting, and they drive the French back. Zaragoza, they leave Zaragoza. Now it's going to be this thing. It's going to become a big thing, and Napoleon gets involved. The British get involved. This is when we get what will become known as the Peninsular War, which is going to last for 6 years. It ends in 1814. But Napoleon is fighting in Spain, and his guys are fighting in Spain. The Duke of Wellington shows up for England. That's where he kind of makes his mark originally, is by helping the British, leading the British during this campaign. And Augustina, she stays there. She stays in the war. So the French return to Zaragoza. They pull back. They regroup. Napoleon shows up to lead the army himself. They returned to Zaragoza in December of 1808.
Again. Poor Zaragoza.
Just a few months after they get them out. They get the French out in August, but they're back in December. They lay siege to the city. Zaragoza resists. There's plague, there's destruction, and by February, so after 3 months of siege, Zaragoza surrenders, and Palafox is captured. He becomes a prisoner of the French army. Agustina of Aragon is captured and becomes a prisoner of the French army. And in February of 1809, she's captured. Her husband, we believe, is dead at this point. He was killed in action, whether that was in the battle we just talked about or at some point beyond. He's killed. She's captured. Palafox is wounded and he gets sick from the plague, and he is captured. And so she goes to a French prison camp and escapes.
Hey, I was worried. That either, she would die of natural causes, or that they would make an example of her.
I was building it up that way. I was trying to build it up like that. Yeah, no, she's captured. She breaks out. She escapes with a group of other prisoners. She finds the Spanish underground, and she starts being part of the resistance against France. She's taking part in guerrilla operations. She's an artillery person now. She's got plenty of experience, plenty of frontline combat experience fighting the French as an artilleryman, because she was a sub-lieutenant. She was commanding, she was on a gun crew for months now throughout that entire siege. So she starts being part of raids on French depots. She starts being part of this guerrilla resistance against France. And there are accounts that once Wellington shows up, once the Spanish army starts to kind of retake Spain, she takes on more of a conventional role as an artilleryman in the army. There's I was reading some things that she was part of Murillo's division at the Battle of Vittoria in 1814, which is like the deciding battle of the Peninsular Campaign. It's years and years after the sieges of Zaragoza, which was 1808. 1814, she's in the Duke of Wellington's army, either manning a gun or commanding a gun crew in one of the Spanish divisions that's fighting alongside the Duke of Wellington. That's the battle that's the final battle of the Peninsular Campaign. Napoleon's defeated. He withdraws. Wellington presses on and faces him at Waterloo, and that's kind of the end of it. But that's it. That's Agustina of Aragon. She doesn't give up, right? She's part of these two sieges. She gets captured. She escapes. She continues on fighting. The thing she's remembered for is that one moment, that one Goya painting or drawing. But she's the Maid of Zaragoza. She's this great hero. But she is a commissioned officer in the Spanish army. She does get the uniform and wear it for the rest of her life with all of the medals that she has earned from her combat experience. And she becomes kind of this cultural icon, right? Goya draws her, as we said. Lord Byron visits her. He meets up with her a couple times, talks to her. He writes about her a lot in Childe Harold, one of his stories. He writes poetry about her. There's movies made about her.
I bet,
she's a huge hero in Spain, right? Yeah. So there's a silent film about her in 1929. There's a movie about her from 1950, and she becomes this big hero, this kind of icon for resistance in Spain. She lives to be 71, and when she dies, she's buried in this big cathedral in Zaragoza, in kind of this place of honor as like she was born there, and she was famous for defending it on multiple occasions against invincible armies. So it's pretty badass.
That's Agustina de Aragón.
Yes. And she has that, very Molly Pitcher vibes, but and
more so, she's more than just that iconic moment.
Right, exactly. And so were those Molly Pitchers, though, too. So were the women you mentioned, right? Including Deborah Sampson. I'm trying to Google translate pitcher into Spanish.
Oh.
But and that's Molly Pitcher, and that's a Napoleonic badass that I was excited to talk about for you guys. So. We really hope you enjoyed the story, and we hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you are, please do like and subscribe to us. We really appreciate it, and we love hearing from you guys. So please do continue to stick with us. Thank you so much. Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.